Pete Yost here for the Unbuild It podcast with a quick word from our sponsor, Huber Engineered Woods. Hey, there's a upcoming Home Building Crossroads Virtual Summit, December 7th and 8th this year, 2022. In this event, you can earn up to 6 AIA continuing education credits. The speakers include myself, Peter Yost, Steve Basic, Jake Bruton, Christine Williamson, and Fred Malik. Quite an array of speakers. For 2 days, you'll learn innovative solutions for a better build and how to make a home durable, beautiful, healthy, and energy efficient. If you would like to register for this upcoming virtual summit, please go to homebuildingcrossroads.com. Thanks.
Well, hello there, Unbuild It podcast. Steve Basic here with my good friends Jake Bruton.
Yep.
Peter Yost.
Howdy.
And we continue on. We are at number 3 of 4 in our series of Love and Hate. And in this episode, we are going to talk about vapor control. I can't even tell you, I don't think I slept a wink last night thinking about recording this. There is a lot to be had here, but I am not going to open it up because I'm not prepared to go off the rails quite yet. So I'm going to offer it up to one of you two to talk about.
Do we also get to choose if we go to the love route or the hate route, or are you determining the route?
I'm going to give you full democratic choice here.
I'll go first.
Can I just do a little preface before you go first?
I was going to say, let's talk about the control layer, because I know that is a Kickstarter.
Well, I just want to say that
It's Pete's primer.
The love-hate thing approach to this was an idea Steve's, and I thought, man, but I'm warming to it. This is our third in the series, and I think you're onto something, Steve. This is a good approach. That's my preface.
Well, thank you.
Don't encourage him.
Yeah, don't. Just, no. Okay, now is it my turn?
It is.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
I hate that when we have a major vapor problem, it becomes not a vapor problem and it becomes a water problem. That's my hate.
Major vapor problem.
Because we're not too terribly worried about a little water vapor in the air,
Mr.
but we are, that's where I was headed. We are worried about the phase change that becomes bulk water, because bulk water was the first part in this series of 4. And it was first for a reason, because it's probably the most important.
Band phase change.
You know?
Rock band phase change.
I just think it's really entertaining that I'm always the geek and you guys are the ones making up band names off of building science topics, because it didn't come from me, folks.
Phase change would be a good one. It could be an album cover too. Phase change.
But isn't that the real problem? We're worried about moisture in the building in the form of bulk water the most. Well, and if we have a real vapor problem, we have a bulk water problem.
I have a penny for your thoughts on that. Spending the 10 years I spent with Joe, if I had a penny every time he said.
Side note, Joe Stieberg from Building Science Corporation.
We do that every time.
He just, I had to be 1,000 times where I've heard him say, when are people going to realize water in the vapor form doesn't matter? It's all around us. The only time it really matters is when you give it the opportunity to condense. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes a problem.
There you go.
There you go. I'm with it. But I know you're chomping at the bit, Pete. So,
well, since Jake led with hate, I'm going to continue on that aspect of this topic. And
that's the best part of these series is that
you love to hate. Love to hate. They cover both of them.
Love hating.
That we think of this as,
and it's ironic because I'm a lover, not a hater.
Oh, God.
But I love hate.
If I don't have to go if I go the rest of my life without hearing you describe yourself as a lover again, it might be a good spot. Don't retaliate. Don't get angry.
I'm not retaliating.
Don't get angry.
I know. Okay. At least you're not military.
Be a lover and not a hater.
That could be another T-shirt. We're coming up with names of T-shirts here.
You guys ready?
Yeah.
No.
Are you done?
Yes. Go ahead.
So we're talking about control layers, and that implies that it's a sort of a single plane. And the thing about, and Steve, you set me up for this. We suffer from the fact that vapor was a problem in the 1940s for the first time in a cold climate, where the solution was to say we need a warm in winter interior side control layer or vapor retarder or even vapor barrier. And it was to control the movement in a certain type of climate in a certain season, and that has led to confusion ever since. So we're not looking at taking the way that we manage vapor and honing it down to one layer.
It's Vapor Anarchy.
I like that. Now that could be a pretty cool band name.
That could be a cool band name too, Vapor Anarchy.
I'm getting in on this. We're actually much more interested in the vapor profile than we are in any one particular layer and controlling moisture there. So, what do you think?
I definitely agree with that. That people seem to, when they talk about vapor, and you're the one that one of the my favorite of your discussions was when we were talking about vapor once, and you described vapor as a uniform load, not a point load. Mm-hmm. And that really, that's an eye opener for someone that doesn't understand vapor, because I think a lot of times I've been to lectures and hear people talking, but they talk about vapor like it's this very distinct pinpointed load, where it really isn't. Vapor's, it's all around us. It's just a question of, can we find a surface to condense, and can we get enough moisture there to make a difference for it to condense and be this problem. But understanding it as a uniform load helps you understand that maybe it's not this, thing that gets in the wall, that it's actually all around.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead, Jay.
It's the conversation of that interior side poly layer was probably not the greatest of barriers, but we did a good enough job with it to stop the vapor drive.
I often wonder, I always see the poly on the inside as an above average air barrier that really saved the day, so that it's not so much the vapor diffusion, it's that it gets put up. Because if you go to Minnesota and all these places where it's very prevalent in Canada, they used to team it up with a Tremco acoustical sealant and put that around, just like we would do sheathing on the outside of the wall for an air barrier. And it worked, I think, as a very good air barrier, which was kind of its saving grace.
Well, you bring up this issue of the point load as opposed to a field effect. And I'll never forget when Joe, in one of his sessions, Joe Stiebrick, said, look, if I put up a vapor control layer or a vapor retarder on the exterior surface of a wall, and I poke holes in it that represent 10% of the total surface area, I have a 90% effective vapor control layer. He said, however...
And as an air barrier?
As an air barrier, all bets are off, because those are pathways. And he described it as, look, if you think of vapor pressure as pushing equally everywhere, if there's a little hole here, the vapor molecules can't say, hey, buddies, other vapor molecules over here. They can't do that. They push equally everywhere. But for a air pathway, they can say, hey, over here, and they all go racing through. The other way that this really struck home with me was I was working on a project where they were using membrane as a vapor control layer. And I said, well, are you also using it as your air control layer? And they said, what do you mean? And if you go to the Certainty Membrane website, there is one set of directions if you're detailing it as the vapor retarder, and that's about 1 page long.
Which is we don't really care. Just staple it up.
Yeah. And then they said, however, if you are using membrane as both your air control layer and the vapor retarder, it's 12 pages of directions. Why? Because if you put up membrane as your vapor control layer and it's like 90% done, it's 90% effective. But if you're doing it as your air control layer, it's got to be meticulously detailed. So
Your
they're
opportunity
different
for success
forces.
drops
They're different
immediately.
forces.
Steve's writing vigorously.
With
And,
his left
and
hand.
not only can I not read it,
On it with his
it's
favorite
upside
pen.
down,
No,
too.
I remembered I wanted peaches
Look at
and
that.
plums from the grocery store.
He laid his pen down so that we can't see what he wrote down, too. Like it really is a grocery list. He didn't want us to know that he's sitting there thinking about, oh, we're out of ginger ale while we're talking.
What?
Where are we next?
Oh, did I talk about love? I didn't talk about my love or hate. What do I love? So I'm going to talk about hate first because, hate's at the top of my list.
Because that's what we were already talking about.
That's what we're already talking about. Yeah. But yes, I'm going to continue on Jake's line of thinking and say, I hate the fact that we believe there's this big, bad vapor monster out there that's out to get us. Every time I'm at lectures, you can't build that kind of assembly because the moisture, you deal with the moisture. And it's like, I always raise my hand and say, well, where's all this moisture coming from that you're so worried about? And most of the time, people don't have.
Can I interject and just say, how fun is it to be presenting and have Steve's in the room raising his hand while you're presenting? You're just like, oh, Christ. Every time his hand goes up and then he just leaves it there and waits and waits.
It is unnerving.
Yeah. Or when he goes to sleep while you're talking. Go ahead.
Then
Don't bore me. I know. That's what he's going to say. He's fell asleep every time I've given a presentation and he was there for it. Continue.
I'm just not that thrilled.
So you raise your hand and you say, where's all this moisture coming from?
Moisture coming from? But it's to just think that it's this big old bad monster that's out to get us everywhere. I cannot, if I put up a detail on social media, I'm almost guaranteed a question of what's the vapor barrier? What's the vapor barrier? What's the vapor retarder? I don't see a vapor retarder there. Why don't you have a vapor retarder? Just all these different things of questions about why. I mean, the house can be operating at 0.3 and they're worried about a damn vapor retarder on the inside of the wall in zone 3 or 4. And it's like, there's no movement. The moisture load is just typical vapor diffusion through the materials. We're obviously not moving air in there. We're really not having any cold surfaces. What is your concern? I don't quite get it. And where is the moisture load? So
it's a good thing that points to let's just all build in San Diego and be done with it.
San Diego is not a bad place. There's this really good barbecue restaurant. No. So.
He was trying to find a way to get barbecue into a 4th week in a row of podcasts.
I've only talked about it once, but you can exaggerate and try and make me look bad. That's good. I mean, I know military guys like barbecue, so let's make jokes about them.
San Diego is a military town. I mean,
it's a strong military.
Yeah.
It's like the first and 7th Fleet or something. Yeah.
So the thing I love about vapor is profiling it. That's what I love to do. You guys know this.
Boring nerd.
So you're a profiler.
You horribly boring nerd.
You're a profiler. Pete the profiler.
Because here's the thing, and I know you guys have heard this so many times, but once the water gets into an assembly, let's not talk about how it got there, but once it gets in, it's only getting out one way, and that's drying potential through layers of building materials.
Are you suggesting it's a rate question?
It is a rate question. Yeah. It's the right rate question.
The right rate. Is that right as in WRIT?
No.
Okay.
Thank you for the plug.
You're welcome. Anything I can do to help?
With the idea that if you don't worry about the vapor permeability of each of the layers in a wall that you're building, then you don't know that if the water does get in, how it's going to get out.
So, Mr. Profiler, a few questions maybe you can help me and the audience out as I will speak for them. Does it matter if we have a vapor barrier somewhere in our wall assembly?
Does it matter?
Does it matter?
It's not so much having, and I'm going to say that you're going to
It depends.
Will you agree that if I say vapor barrier, that we're talking about a class 1 vapor
An
retarder?
impermeable surface.
So, right. So we're talking about the most restrictive. So
Yes,
0.1
because
perms
people
or
always say
less.
your walls need to dry. So I'm asking you, Pete the Profiler, your opinion on what if I install an impermeable material in my wall assembly?
Okay, so I'm going to say, if you did not want to ever impede vapor, then the safest is to build an entire assembly vapor open. Very hard to do.
Is there a measurement for vapor open? And again, I'm speaking for the audience.
Good question. If you built with every single layer of an assembly that was 10 perms or greater, that would be considered a totally vapor open assembly. There's very little restriction to the flow of moisture in either direction. That's very, very difficult to do. So the next question is, well, what if I do have one layer somewhere in the assembly that is a class 1 vapor retarder, which essentially blocks vapor movement? The answer is no, I'm not worried about that, because from that single layer, it can dry in either direction. So it's not one class 1 retarder that's the problem. It's if you have two that are that restrictive, and now you've trapped moisture between them.
So the ability to dry, you're saying, is the most important aspect, not necessarily the ability to dry through.
Right. And I don't really care which way the assembly dries. I mean, we get this question about zip all the time, which is, hey, wait a minute, you're putting that on the outside of the assembly. You're making it wicked cold, particularly if it's zip R. How does that not create an assembly where moisture is a problem? Well, if from that restrictive layer of the zip sheathing with the polyiso, it can dry to the outside and the rest of the assembly can dry to the inside, that's part of the design of their system.
And if I couple that with a rain screen system that
You have ultimate drying potential.
and then I couple it with an air tightness of 1.0 or better,
There's nothing moving
then
through
there's
the
nothing
wall.
moving into the wall really, other than stuff that's diffusing through the wall.
And I get this question quite a lot, which is, have you ever built intentionally an assembly that can't dry in both directions? And the SIPS edition that we did on my house in Brattleboro, that was pretty restrictive OSB on both sides of the SIP panel, then a ice and water shield applied directly to the outside of the roof. The drying potential of that assembly is pretty poor. So I have designed assemblies like that, but I
Which is
built
why
it.
he sold that house already too.
Got out before the kitchen collapsed.
Got out before the kitchen roof collapsed. Oh boy. So the reason I was comfortable with that is I built it.
You were going to be the one maintaining it.
I was the one maintaining it. The roof assembly had 0 penetrations, right? And so there are times when you get forced into assemblies that don't have a terribly good drying potential. But if you do that, you better make sure that you get the 2 layers that we consider more important than this one, the water management and the air management, correct. So when it becomes most important that you have excellent drying potential is when you haven't been able to do a great job or the best job you can on the water control layer or the air control layer. Now you're super dependent on exceedingly good drying potential. So if you get the first 2 right, it puts less pressure on your backup plan, which is drying potential.
Which is why you felt it necessary to note there were no roof penetrations in that. Not necessarily because of vapor, right?
No,
that was a air and water.
I did a really,
conversation.
really good job on the first 2 layers. Yeah.
Well, and to continue in my line of inquisition here, you like that, don't you? It's always interesting to me that people say, "Oh no, the wall has to dry." It's kind of like structural design. Like we can design a floor to carry 1,000 pounds per square foot,
Oh, that's an interesting comparison.
but we really don't need it in the kitchen, right? We just need the 40 pounds per square foot.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I can build a wall that pretty much has flow-through vapor design but I don't need to do that. And I don't need to necessarily incur the cost to build that assembly, that might have a semi-permeable or impermeable component to the assembly that allows the wall to dry in both directions.
Yeah, and remember that if we follow this order of priority, your comment about the Vapor Monster, if you're spending an inordinate amount of time worried about that one vapor retarder layer, and you're not spending that time and money on worrying about air and water, that's totally misplaced, right? I mean,
well, I can tell you, I've been in houses where the attention to detail of the Stego wrap under the slab is higher than in the flashing on the windows.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. We want to keep it out and we want to put it there, but I all my drawings, I put 6 mil poly. I never spec anything else. And the reason somebody said, why do you just put 6 mil poly? Because then the building inspector can't expect more. We can move up to 10 mil poly or we can move up to Stego wrap. But if I put in Stego wrap, we can never move down to 10 mil poly or 6 mil poly.
Yep.
And here's the other thing about this particular control layer, which is there are climates where worrying about the location of the vapor retarder, it's not in the code. You don't have to worry about it. But there's no place in the U.S. that you shouldn't worry about your vapor profile, which is picking the vapor permeability of the layers so you have directional drying potential.
So in your consulting work, have you ever had a client that is kind of off the wall bananas about vapor?
That seems like a leading question.
We were just talking about this. Yeah, I actually have a client right now who is very focused on the location of a vapor control layer in a climate where it doesn't really matter. And, you know, in his defense, he's been doing a lot of reading on this topic of water and vapor management, and his heart's in the right place. He's pretty focused on this.
He wants a really well-built house.
Yep. And it's a retrofit,
but
which
he
makes
opens his shirt to IntelloMan.
Yeah, as if, going for a super performing product in one layer is going to solve the problem.
And now Pete's in a situation where he has to go, yeah, I know you read that. It's wrong. All the information that you just researched, I disagree with.
Well,
or maybe it doesn't pertain to the circumstance or something.
Yeah, but that's a really difficult situation.
So in defense of people that get overwhelmed with what they learn on the internet, it's not sometimes that there's contradictory advice. It's just that think about how long it took each of us to get to the point where we feel confident about prioritizing the control layers and doing a vapor profile for drying. I remember going to some of Joe's early lectures and just being absolutely terrified by the complexity of the science. But
I'm pretty fortunate that I never grew up in the world of not understanding that.
Yeah, you started as a young architect, right?
Right out of college. I had like a year or so at another firm doing other stuff, but then I just jumped in and went to building science. So all of my education has been down the building science route, which has been just...
You're not having to unlearn.
I don't have to unlearn anything. I've only learned stuff.
There's an architect I've been working with for over 10 years, and it's really interesting that when we first worked together, he was calling me a lot. And now, at this point, he's calling me with fewer and fewer questions,
so he's either gained some intelligence or he's just totally bored with you.
Or he's gained some intelligence that he doesn't want to talk to Pete.
So it's probably a bit of both.
Also, Pete just made it sound like I'm confident in what we're talking about.
While you said that statement, I'm thinking, do I call Pete?
He's talking about you. Okay, so
yeah.
Let's move on to a love, because everything that we just talked about is my love.
And I didn't really even go off the rails. I'm proud of myself.
I think my love is that vapor can very easily be managed if you're paying attention in the design process. It's one of the easiest ones to deal with, and literally the design process can resolve all your problems with this one. Like, yeah, obviously there's execution that has to take place. But if you have a good design in place, if you've considered what the wall assembly is going to be, like, it's a lot more difficult sometimes to deal with water than it is vapor.
And when you say design,
after.
I think you're also including specification.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
In other words, I'm not worried about it. It's not a big deal.
Good. That's good.
You know?
I'm happy that you're not worried. When you get worried, I worry. So I'm happy that you're not worried.
Yeah, if I'm paying enough attention that now I'm worried, we should all have been worried already.
We should have already been.
Everybody else should have been putting on life jackets.
On the other hand, I would say that if you're going to turn over a high performance to occupants or owners, and you don't let them know that their contribution to vapor control is also important.
I have the word occupants because we're headed there.
Yeah, I mean, they have the potential to shift the performance of the building.
Go ahead. You can say it. Screw crap up.
You know, well, you've heard this many times, but the lecture that Joe did where he said, if we could just keep windows and people out of buildings,
Yeah.
it would make life a lot easier.
You're going to really have some successful buildings.
With his wife, Betsy Pettit, the architect, just cringing, like, isn't,
That's the whole purpose of buildings.
right, to make them beautiful and accommodate what people want from them.
Otherwise, they're called sculpture.
Yeah, yeah.
So I have an acquaintance that lives in, I believe, Crescent
So what does that
Butte.
mean?
Acquaintance?
Yeah.
I
Like
do not know this
you
gentleman.
have a lover or you have a friend. Where does acquaintance?
I don't know him well enough to be to call him my friend. I feel like he would be offended if I was telling people we were friends and we've only spoken 5 or 6 times. I don't know him
acquaintance
well.
is a lesser friend.
Yes,
Okay.
potentially a friend.
Potential to be a friend, but not there yet.
Yeah.
Is what an acquaintance.
So the occupant conversation, he does some building failure investigations from time to time, and like 5 or 6 years ago when I met him, he was like, oh yeah, if I get one from inside the state of Colorado and they're like, yeah, the windows are getting condensation all over them. Like we have really high moisture inside the house. He's like, I'm always the first thing out of my mouth is how many pot plants? How many weed plants are you growing in your 3-bedroom house? And everybody says, oh, 45. And he's like, all right, quit growing pot plants inside your house. But that's the idea of like, we don't have control over it. The occupants are in control of the house. You know, if you have a family that has 4 generations under one roof that runs a food truck business out of their house they all really love hot showers. Like,
yeah.
You have no control. Or the one person, like you were talking about earlier, living in a 4,000 square foot house by themselves.
Well, it's still a shame in the U.S. that you can buy a pretty expensive programmable thermostat that doesn't have a hygrometer built into it. So we're going to ask people to be conscious about moisture.
That pisses me off.
Yeah.
That should have been my hate about vapor, was that we ask people to be conscious of it and give them no way to
There's
measure
no way
it.
to figure it out.
Exactly. No hygrometer. What the hell?
Okay, let's talk real quick about the hygrometer at my house because it's on the thermostats.
Ooh.
I hate the thermostats. I'd never recommend them, just like you, Pete. They're crappy. I don't like them. So I have a bunch of the Accurite gauges that I know they're not perfect, but if I put 2 in a room, I can probably assume that it's somewhere.
You're right. That's a double positive.
So just to be fair about the manufacturers, it's not that it's Accurite. It's the question of which Accurite, the $10 model or
it's
the $50?
20. It's the $18 model or whatever. Yes, 100%. That is a very good
Is that
point.
a good one or no?
I'm
The $20 one?
I'm buying the cheapest one that they make.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
it's sort of
I have
wishful
40
thinking.
of them and I put them in all of our jobs and I just go, okay, it's close enough for what we're doing. And if somebody breaks it, I'm not out.
So you're
$200.
buying the cheap one in the hope that it's going to give you a favorable number,
Enough.
so you can feel
No,
good
that
about
it'll give me
yourself.
just enough information. My wife, when we moved into our house, we actually had a conversation about how the house was going to operate, things that we needed to be concerned with. And she's one of those people that was already understood the humidity in the house could be a problem and that we could get mold growth over, whatever it is, 60 or 65%. And she came to me the first summer that we lived there and she said it's been like 62 to 65% RH in here for like the last 5 or 6 days. And it's not going down. Do we need to turn the dehumidifier on? Well, we have one of those box dehumidifiers. We don't have a ducted. And I'm like, we're climate zone 4. We really shouldn't be having. And I legit waited for her to leave for work and then just went through the house to all 4 thermostats and turned them up 2 degrees. And the RH reads lower. So I took care of our humidity problem by changing the temperature in the house. And I don't, like we talk about all the time, this is a safe space. She has no idea that that's what I did. But I said, no, I think it caught up.
Well, that's really interesting because my brother Nathan, who lives nearby, he will not use the expression relative humidity. He said dew point. He comes over and says, "You know what the dew point is this morning?" Because that's the right way to think about moisture, not relative, because that's totally dependent on temperature.
I tend to agree with Nathan.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of Nathan, in an upcoming podcast where we talk about mold, we're going to bring in Dr. Nathan Yost to talk with us about that. Okay. Nice.
What about my love?
You better hurry.
So my love, you're going to like this. It is the harmony that I feel within when I look at details and I understand that I'm actually using vapor control to dry my assembly. So it's not the big bad monster. It's the ability to dry using vapor in a positive fashion, not a negative fashion.
This is a different Steve Basic. Like, was there something in that plum? Did you inject that with something?
I wasn't listening. As soon as you started talking, all I could hear was, "Let my love open the door." Who is that? And now I have to think about who the...
It's either New Orleans. Is that Orleans?
No. Boy, we'll post that in the comments. Okay. Yeah, that's an easy one.
All right.
Way to go, Steve.
There you go. Love, hate. 3 down, 1 to go. Thermal insulation, suit up. You're up next. But until then, smash that subscribe button and leave us some comments. You throw us a couple questions or answers, and we'll, if you want, you can be the wise guy and throw up the answers, and then we'll develop the questions for you. So whatever we got to do to get a good Q&A session. But until next time, I'm signing off. Pete?
I just love that you said we're going to talk about thermal and suit up for it. That was pretty clever.
Wait, did we get a Pete's resource?
Vapor Profiles, the GBA blog.
Okay. Thanks for listening.
Bye.